Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Clinton Drell, Managing Director at unpacks HR. I wanted to give you all my thoughts on the current lockdowns we're seeing across Australia, particularly New South Wales, and to reflect on some of the workplace relations implications of that. Specifically focus on the New South Wales ones, because that's where most of our clients are, and that's probably where the most significant lockdowns have been. So the one thing I would say, look, there's a lot of people that are sort of, patting the government on the back on this and saying, that look, lockdowns are necessary and so on. And look, I'm going to disappoint you by saying that, look, my view is completely the opposite of that. I think that the government directions in relation to the lockdowns so far and in relation to the directions to work have been very, very confusing at best and have been changing almost on a daily basis. And just to give you an idea of over the weekend, what we just saw. So originally we saw that people who lived within the 3 affected LGAs were only able to leave those LGAs if they were working in emergency or basically health. And that was the starting point for the lockdowns and the persons upon which could leave those 3 LGAs. Then we had the very next day, and we briefed our clients about all of this on Saturday. Then the very next day, we had a whole new category of authorised workers in about 10 other industries that were added presumably overnight and look, for God knows what reasons. But basically we had 10 other industries added to this, and that again only applied within those 3 LGAs. So basically if you were employed in any one of these other 10 industries in any of the subcategories that were listed, you could still go to work from within those 3 LGAs, provided that you were able to do so. Then we had the situation where there was testing every 3 days within those 3 LGAs, but only if you left those 3 LGAs for work and not if you were living outside of those 3 LGAs coming into those LGAs for work. Then that changed to just 1 LGA a couple of days later. So again, more confusion about this. And outside of the 3 LGAs, we had further confusion because some people were thinking, well, the authorised worker test or essential worker test, if you want to call it the essential worker test, only applied to those, applied to everyone, when really it only applied to those 3 LGAs. So outside of the 3 LGAs, you've got a completely different paradigm where so long as the business is open and if you can't perform the work from home, you can go to work, so to speak. And not only that, you could do that if you were living and working within the same LGA. So for example, if I'm a cleaner working in Smithfield in the Fairfield LGA and the cleaning job is in Wetherill Park and that business is still open, it's not on the closed business list, I can go to work in that particular job. But I can't go to the Liverpool LGA to do exactly the same job if it was in that LGA. So that just gives you a bit of an idea of the kind of the madness that's going on here with some of these restrictions and how poorly they've been thought out. And the fact that we've got this concept of essential worker or authorised worker still not clear after 16 months is not good enough. It frankly should be pretty simple for the government to work out in advance, not when a virus hits or not when there's an outbreak. It shouldn't take a whole 16 months for the government to figure out, well, what essential industries are there? What do we need to continue to operate in a lockdown situation and what is not needed? And the fact that the governments are still making this up as they go is just unacceptable. And how can businesses operate in this particular environment? And what we're seeing as well as another layer on top of this is this kind of complacent compliance. So when businesses aren't sure, they're just not doing it, or they're telling people not to work or not do certain things. And whilst that might sound fantastic for anyone who's not a small business owner, I can assure you that small business owners can and should be looking for what they're allowed to do within the letter of the law, of course, and nothing beyond that. But to be simply not doing something because you're not sure, well, I don't think that's the right way to go about it. I think you look at what you can do, what am I allowed to do, what are my employees allowed to do, and try and do whatever you can within those confines. So, look, I would say that I'm very critical on this because the fact that it's taken 16 months after this virus started and we still don't have any clarity on any of these concepts is quite frankly, it's ridiculous. We've also got no methodology or metrics on restrictions. We've got some states that are, first of all, worse than others. We've got no definition around what's a hotspot and what situations require testing for work nationally. Now, bear in mind, the workplace relations system we have is national, and obviously all these lockdowns are state-based, which just makes things even more difficult because you've got, for example, New South Wales that up until recently was being put up as the gold standard of continuing to operate businesses and workplaces while there was some elements of the virus in the community. You've got these, for lack of a better word, overreactive governments in other states that will call something a hotspot if there's one or two cases. I mean, how can a hotspot be one or two cases? And, this whole definition of a hotspot, again, is very, very strange, very loose. Seems like, any premier can just decide whatever they want based on whatever's in their political interest at the time. And it's not good enough for businesses 16 months in for them to be subjected to this sort of, drop of the hat kind of decision making. So again, there should be clear definitions around what's a hotspot, when does increased testing in a hotspot become a requirement, when is a state-based lockdown required? I mean, the National Cabinet have spoken about so many things in the last 16 months, but what they still can't seem to agree on is any kind of metrics or dimensions around what's a hotspot, when do we have a state-based lockdown, and there's this kind of race to the bottom of who can have the least number of cases for their political gain. So very disappointing, I think, across the board. New South Wales situation, disappointing. Equally, the decision we're seeing across other states as well. So the other thing we're not getting any clarity on is which industries create risk of spread and when lockdowns will apply. And we see hospitality is always the first to go. They seem to be the one that's on the chopping block as soon as there's some sort of community transmission, again, varying from state to state. But in terms of the construction lockdown for the last 2 weeks, well, we've got no logic or rationale whatsoever as to why the government has decided to stop construction. From my understanding, there wasn't any evidence for them to stop construction, that there was a significant number of cases in construction other than what would ordinarily be expected in the course of people going about their work. So, yeah, sure, you're going to have the occasional workplace that might be affected and potentially other employees needing to isolate, but to be shutting down whole industries without any evidence and without any metrics, you can understand the business community being not happy, and you're starting to see, obviously, people in the business community saying things about this. So all in all, terrible planning around the lockdowns, terrible that leaders can't even understand or have basic metrics around these concepts. What's a hotspot? When's testing required? When's a state-based lockdown required? What industries are the first to go and which ones are later? So there's some thoughts on the government lockdowns for you to all digest. That's where we'll leave it for today. So look, thanks very much for listening. If you've got any COVID-19 related questions or any of the concepts we've spoken about today, please reach out to On-Demand HR. I'll be happy to give you some assistance. Happy to explain to you also how we generally work with customers and clients to work through these types of issues. Thanks very much for your time.